Alright, now a typical flower is going to have whorls of modified leaves that are attached at the receptacle, and the receptacle is at the end of the peduncle, which is the flower stalk. And the sepals protect the bud. They're leaf-like and they're usually green, and we call them collectively the calyx. And the petals are going to be colorful many times, and they attract pollinators. And all the petals together, we collectively call them the corolla. Now the stamens are the male parts of the flower. You've got the filament, which is the stalk, and on the tip of the filament is the anther, which is a sac-like container. And this is where the pollen grains develop from microspores that are produced here. Now the carpel is the female part of the flower. On the end of it is a sticky knob called the stigma, and then you have a stalk that's called the style, and at the base of that is the ovary, which is enlarged, and it contains the ovules. And you can see all these here. You've got the stigma, the style, and down here is the ovary that contains the ovule. And then you've got the filaments and the anthers, and of course the pinks, the petals, and the green leaves are the sepals, and of course the stalk is the peduncle. This is just showing you up at the top. You've got monocot, and everything's going to be in multiples of 3 or 3, and you see you've got 6 there. That's a daylily. And down at the bottom you have a eudicot, which is a azalea, and you see it's in 5, so it's going to be in 4s or 5s or multiples of 4s or 5s. Here you've got some corn plants, and we're going to look at monoecious versus dioecious. Monoecious plants have the staminate flowers and the carpellate flowers on the same plant. It's one house for the male and the female, the stamen and the carpel. The dioecious have them on separate plants, 2 houses. Corn plants are monoecious. You see the tassels that come out, those are the staminate flowers. And then the silk on the end of the corn, that's the carpellate flower. So a corn plant is monoecious. And this is just showing you the life cycle, which you can review, but you've got fertilization happens, and the ovule develops into the seed, and it's going to contain the sporophyte and the endosperm, the nourishment, and it's got this is the mature seed. It goes through mitosis, and it eventually makes this sporophyte, which again is diploid. And you've got the pollen sac with the anther, with the microspores that will develop. And you've also got, in the ovule, you've got the megaspores that will develop into the ovule that you see down at the bottom, down here where you have the gametophytes. And those, the microspores and the megaspores here, when the pollen lands on the stigma, it grows a pollen tube down, and that fertilizes the ovule. And it's a double fertilization that we'll talk about in just a minute. Now, the development of the male gametophyte. You've got microspores made by the anthers, and the anther has 4 pollen sacs, and they each have many microspore mother cells, and those are going to produce the pollen grains, which again are gametophytes, so they are haploid. And then the female, the ovary, has 1 or more ovules, and an ovule has a central mass that is the plant's version of stem cells called parenchyma cells, and they're covered by layers of tissue called integuments, except right at the opening, which is the micropyle. and one parenchyma cell enlarges and it becomes the megaspore mother cell. And that goes through meiosis and makes 4 haploid megaspores. 3 of these are non-functional. They're polar bodies. And the female gametophyte contains 1 egg cell as well as additional helper cells. Pollination happens when the pollen from the anther lands on the stigma of the carpel. And it's self-pollination if the pollen came from the same plant. It's cross-pollination if a different plant produces the pollen, and then it moves to another plant on the stigma. Now, fertilization is when the pollen grain lands on the stigma, it germinates and it forms that pollen tube I mentioned a while ago. And that pollen tube grows down to the ovule, and it goes through the pore in the ovule called the micropyle. And double fertilization happens. I told you we'd talk about this. One of the sperm nucleus unites with the egg nucleus, and that makes the diploid zygote. The other sperm nucleus unites with the polar nuclei, and that forms a 3N, a triploid endosperm nucleus, and that will become the endosperm. So the mature seed has the embryo, the stored food, the endosperm, and a seed coat.